Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics, where we're going to take a look, and this is wonderful, at 10 excellent classic reads for summer. So whether you're going down to the beach on holiday or just idling away the hours in the back garden and wanting to drift away, there should be a book in here for everybody. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? The first book on our list is a peach of a book. It's really such a lovely book to drift away with, and it is Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. The predominant section of this book takes place in summer. Yes, you have other seasons, but everything about this reminds me of lazy, sunny days watching the wind play in waves across the tops of the wheat fields. So our main protagonist in this is the heroine Bathsheba Everdeen, a great heroine, and she's a young woman of independence. She's quite vain in her own way. There's a lovely opening scene to demonstrate a little bit of her hidden vanity. And three suitors, Gabriel Oak, Farmer Boldwood and Sergeant Troy, all different characters, and they all fall for Bathsheba. But how will she respond to each three of them? Because Gabriel Oak comes from humble origins, but he's a sound and good man, albeit sometimes a bit brusque. Boldwood is older than Bathsheba Everdeen, but very well established financially and really does care for her. And then Troy is a sergeant and a particularly brilliant soldier with all the looks and swagger that go with it. There's more than just a love story in this. There's more than just the classic triangle, or in this one, I suppose it's the love rhombus, isn't it? What you've got in here is an examination of the way we work as humans. You get insight and you get folly. An absolutely delicious book. Once you've read it, it's a book you won't regret reading. So that was number one, Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. For those of you who like to read a good memoir or biography in the summer, or if you like something with passion, with great writing, poetry and sentiment, then the next book is going to be right up your street, because in second place we have Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. What a beautiful book. It's also a sizable one as well. Now, I read this in November last year and it won my heart. There's so much in this. It's actually, Vera Brittain intended to write this as a novel based on her experiences going through the First World War as a nurse. But she couldn't get the necessary distance of a narrator from the writing. And because of that, she just wrote it as a true and factual memoir. Now, what's lovely about this book is it recounts, obviously, a lost generation, the generation of young men that went to the trenches in France to fight. And then she tries to do her bit in the war effort. Now, when the war breaks out, she's about to go into college. And when you start, she's a very honest and not the most likable character in some respects. She's very self-confident, very, a bit over the top with some of her opinions and views of life when she's so young. But the way she describes her friendships, particularly with four young men, and I'm trying to remember their names now. Roland is one of them, Geoffrey, Victor, and Edward, who is her brother. They all go off to war, but she'll always remember the last day when all of them were together. She'll eventually become a nurse and get over there, and it's the way she deals with all these young soldiers, the situations they find themselves in. But this is peppered with letters and poems back and forth from the front. Poems she wrote about ones she loved. Poems that loved ones wrote back to her. That capture so much, because the First World War in some respects was the poets' war. So many great minds and poets were lost in that brutal conflict. And what's even more interesting is how society treats those heroes after the war is finally won and over. It's interesting to hear what Vera says, but the beauty in this book, some of it is just, sublime. Let me just read you a little snippet. This is a little poem sent to Vera by a young man who's a soldier in France, and it puzzles her at the time she first reads it. but oh, it moves your heart when you just read on a bit further. Here's the poem. Heideville, November 1915. The sunshine on the long white road that ribboned down the hill, the velvet clematis that clung around your window sill, are waiting for you still. Again the shadowed pool shall break in dimples round your feet, and when the thrush sings in your wood, unknowing you may meet another stranger sweet. And if he is not quite so old as the boy you used to know, and less proud too and worthier, you may not let him go. And daisies are truer than passion flowers. It will be better so. Oh, you've got to know what comes after that poem. It will move you so much. But these are all the things Vera collected over the time through the war, which gives us such a way to access what was going on, because she kept records and wrote all of the time and had letters. It is a very stirring and moving book that will make you smile and will probably break your heart. The third book on our list is a book I've recommended so many times that if you've been with me for a long time, you know what's coming. But it is a book to be read in summer, even if you've read it before. And it is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Please, if you haven't read this book, read it. It's 100 pages long. And it is just a beautiful and affecting tale of life. It captures so much in this book. So basically you have the main character, Brittain, who he's come back from the First World War. He's got shell shock. His wife has left him and he tries to re-establish himself, and he gets a job going up north to a Yorkshire village called Oxgoodby, where there's a small village church, and he's asked that could he remove the plaster from one of the walls because there's supposedly a fresco behind it from the Middle Ages. And we see him over the course of the month in the country, actually a bit longer I think, slowly restoring this mural. And he gets to become attached to the person who painted it centuries before. The detail of describing what kinds of compounds the old medieval painter must have crushed to create the hues of colour that he's got. Being isolated up his scaffolding, spending time understanding the people that are in this image and how some of them must be taken from local villagers back in that day. And of course Brittain also interacts with a few of the villagers as well, as some of the poorer folk invite him around their house for dinner, as he goes to a church service one time, even though he's not religious. The subtle draw of magnetic feeling towards a person, but she's already married. And then all of this has the heat of the sun on it. You hear the rustle and sough of gentle wind going through the drying leaves of the trees in the churchyard outside. In the field over the way, where another man called Moon is doing some archaeological research, and Brittain and Moon, they see each other every morning and they get to strike up a friendship based on a camaraderie from the war, even though they never met each other before. You know, you can sense the flow, the gentle touch of the wind playing in waves across the top of the mustard yellow wheat heads. You know, it is just marvellous, but what it makes you realise is that you are alive now, and it connects you with the people who have walked in the same places as you through the past centuries. That wherever you go, and whatever you feel in matters of relationships, in work, in anything, someone else once felt those things too, in exactly the same spot. And it causes you just to come to the moment, to stop and be for a few minutes. Wonderful, wonderful book. I'll read you a little snippet. There was so much time that marvellous summer. Day after day, mist rose from the meadow as the sky lightened, and hedges, barns and woods took shape until, at last, the long curving back of the hills lifted away from the plain. It was a sort of stage magic. Now you don't see. Indeed, there's nothing to see. Now look. Day after day it was like that. And each morning I leaned on the yard gate dragging at my first cigarette, and I'd like to think marvelling at this splendid backcloth. But it can't have been so. I'm not the marvelling kind. Or was I then? But one thing is sure. I had a feeling of immense content, and if I thought at all, it was that I'd like this to go on and on. No one going, no one coming. Autumn and winter always loitering around the corner. Summer's ripeness lasting forever. Nothing disturbing the even tenor of my way, as I think someone may have said before me. It's just beautiful. A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Our fourth book is a book of intense feeling, and if you're a person that likes to experience thoughtful emotion, particularly sometimes sorrowful, amongst the scintilla of hope and passions, then you're going to like this if you're patient. It's F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night. I can't fully do justice to describing the tone of this book, but it's wonderful. It's actually based off of F. Scott Fitzgerald's relationship with Zelda Fitzgerald. They were a well-known couple, very jet-setty, always in society together. But of course, they both had their issues. And Fitzgerald, he distills that into the most, telling tale of sumptuousness, yet sadness. Your desire for things to go right, but the knowledge that things beneath the surface are not at ease. So in the story, you have Dick and Nicole Diver. They have a hotel down at the French Riviera before it's popular with the high set. And a young actress girl called Rosemary turns up in the first chapter. We see her on the beach with the sun beating down. And she's recovering from getting a bit of a cold from doing some filming in Italy where she dived into the Venice canals and she's, got a bit ill. So she's recovering. And she meets Dick and Nicole with a whole group of other people around them and gets sucked into their thrall, as in they are lovely people. They have an energy and excitement about them. Think of Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. They knew how to have parties, etc. And they're so pleasing, and they care for her, and they open their house up to her, and she joins the group. But amongst the group, there are so many other interesting characters. People who want to write books or be political, or musicians and artists and whatever you can imagine. Some who have been from one war to another, go visiting countries to sign up with the rebels and fight in the mountains. And it's the way they all orbit Dick and Nicole. But there's a problem. Although he's older, Rosemary falls for him. And she is beautiful. And Dick does love Nicole. But there is a secret Nicole has. And it actually is the same secret that Zelda has had in real life. How this book progresses, the tornness of your emotions, your desires, your heart, your sense of loyalty to someone, but understanding the difficulties as well. This book really, really severs you open and really gets to work on your heart. And at the end, you'll definitely be moved, and most people, I imagine, will be somewhat confused as to what they're supposed to think. I don't mean it's an unclear ending, it's very clear, but your emotions, that's such a different kettle of fish. How to feel about the characters is very, very awkward, and not many a writer can pull this off. I'll just give you an idea of the tone of the book. Again, brilliant for reading in summer, but a certain darkness, the shadow hanging over some corner is there, brooding over the whole story. Here's a little snippet. But to be included in Dick Diver's world for a while was a remarkable experience. People believed he made special reservations about them, recognizing the proud uniqueness of their destinies buried under the compromises of how many years. He won everyone quickly with an exquisite consideration and a politeness that moves so fast and intuitively that it could only be examined in its effect. Then, without caution, lest the first bloom of the relation wither, he opened the gate to his amusing world. So long as they subscribed to it completely, their happiness was his preoccupation. But at the first flicker of doubt as to its all-inclusiveness, he evaporated before their eyes, leaving little communicable memory of what he had said or done. That somewhat mysterious aura just painted there actually encompasses the whole book, not just Dick Diver. And it's remarkable. And when you know the story of Scott and Zelda, this becomes even more poignant. A book that will last in your memory. Our fifth book is for those of you who like a good comedy. And it comes from one of the 20th century's not only most brilliant writers, but varied writers who wrote in all sorts of genres. And it's Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana, because when we're thinking of summer, I mean, what's more summery than Cuba in the height of summer heat? So the main character in this book, it tickles me, this book, there's a couple of set scenes which really will make you guffaw. So in this book, the main character is a guy called Wormold, an unusual name. Now he's a British expat, and he is out there in Havana trying to make a living as a vacuum cleaner salesman. He has a little shop and he sells vacuums. And actually there's a new style of vacuum just come in when you get into the book. Don't worry, that's not what it's about. While he is in his little business, a man visits one day and tries to recruit him for the British Secret Service because they want to spy on the socialist Cuban regime. And they offer to pay him. Now you see, he's not interested in doing it, except Wormold has a daughter who is constantly spending all of his money. She's also got herself mixed up romantically with a gangster from the Havana mob. And he realises that, you know, he might make a little bit of money. And so he agrees to help the British Secret Service. And what he's supposed to do is write back some reports about what he sees going on in the country. He suddenly realises how much money can be made with little effort if you just make stuff up. And so that's what he starts to do, sending London and MI6 a lot of, you know, made up stuff which sounds somewhat plausible, inserting certain names who, you know, aren't real. And then all hell breaks loose when things he's been reporting on falsely start happening. And it's not as bizarre as you imagine it. And when names he's made up actually match real people's names involved in the problems. And so begins quite the escapade as he comes under scrutiny by the Secret Service as they send others out to join him. And now he hasn't got the luxury of just making stuff up, but he has to keep living the lie of what he's made up so far. The hijinks that this gets into, as well as with the police and the government and the mob also being involved in the scene. This is quite an easy read and a very enjoyable read. I don't know what I would read as a snippet from this because a lot of it is dialogue, and the hijinks is lots. There's one particular scene where people meet and they're both thinking they know the other person or know why the other person is there when they've actually got their wires crossed completely. And the conversation that goes on is absolutely spectacular, but you'll have to read it to find out. That one section is worth it on its own, let alone how vacuum cleaners fit into the whole scene. So there was our fifth book, Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene. What is summer reading without a good love story, a romance? And our sixth book fits this bill beautifully, but it's romance that goes deeper than just a romantic story. It's a story that also explores you. It explores the feelings of attraction, that sexual tension, and also the danger that's involved with meeting people who are not of your sort. The book is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. We actually read this in my Patreon group some time ago, and it's been one of the most popular of our reads amongst the community. Main character in this is Lucy, isn't it? Lucy. And she's away on the grand tour in Italy doing what the Edwardian upper middle class do, trying to mimic their social betters. They go and try and culture themselves. And Italy is the place to go. And Lucy goes with her chaperone, Charlotte, who is a lot older than her and is this dry and sour, almost great aunt kind of figure. She's not her great aunt, but she comes across like it. Prim and proper. Everything is brown and dowdy. You know, it's typically Edwardian, stifling drawing room society. And even the hotel where they stay is owned by an English English landlord, who has designed the hotel to look like an English hotel, even though they're in Italy. And instead of going and culturing yourself by looking carefully, they read books about what they're supposed to appreciate. You know, she's very by the book, is Lucy. And then in the hotel there is a father and son, Mr. Emerson and his son George. And they don't quite fit the criteria of proper society. They see far too much broadly. They take hold of different ideas of culture. In their mind, they don't just accept the strictures of Edwardian society. And to start with, you know, they're seen as uncouth. Charlotte certainly doesn't want Lucy mixing with George. However, a mischance outing in the town of Florence sees Lucy get lost, and she ends up bumping into George. And although she's not particularly polite to him, there's something, that indefinable magnetism that someone possesses who is a little out of the way of the ordinary. And that's George. George is not a player. He's not someone who uses a golden tongue to woo people. He's quite the sultry, moody character. Not full-on Byronic, but getting close. And he's intelligent, and he sees the world differently, and there is something about that opens Lucy's eyes. And then a sequence of events happen. They're not like all tied deliberately together. They're just events where you see Lucy's mind opening up to other ideas. The room with a view is your mind. We furnish our mind to match the world we think is correct. But George has several windows. Lucy doesn't. And there are scenes in this, there's particularly one scene in the high hills around Florence, where there's a palpable electricity between the two of them. There's something naughty about it. You don't want to be caught. And yet it's so intense, and you're just locked in yourself. Not many an author can do that. For that moment, you feel your heart beating in rhythm with Lucy's. It's a beautiful thing. And then it cuts back to Brittain later on, and you've got the typical English little village in summer with its red tile roofs and its gossips and its little coppice and woods nearby, where one of the funniest things happens in a pond with the vicar. And it just captures summer moments. It will capture moments which you've never had, but you have had. You know, you've never lived in a village, perhaps. You've never hung out with the local vicar. But the things people get up to, you just know that sense of fun. You know the sense of emotions that everyone is experiencing. And also the difficulties that society imposes, because there is someone else who is after Lucy as well. And that's the story. You're going to have to read, obviously I've got no spoilers there, there's more to it, but you have to read this book. It's beautifully written. Ian Forster is just an exquisite penman. Here's a little taster of some of the writing. He threw up his head in disdain. Apparently she had given the wrong answer. She watched the singular creature pace up and down the chapel. For a young man, his face was rugged, and, until the shadows fell upon it, hard. Enshadowed, it sprang into tenderness. She saw him once again at Rome, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, carrying a burden of acorns. Healthy and muscular, he yet gave her the feeling of greyness, of tragedy that might only find solution in the night. The feeling soon passed. It was unlike her to have entertained anything so subtle. Born of silence and of unknown emotion, it passed when Mr. Emerson returned, and she could re-enter the world of rapid talk, which was alone familiar to her. Do you get that certain perplexingness of emotions and thought as she's exposed to a character who doesn't behave quite right, but there's something fascinating about him. She sees him in works of art on the ceiling of Rome, the repeated face. So there you go, A Room with a View by Ian Forster. Our seventh book is a book for you who like to read a large book in summer. You may have read this one, maybe consider reading it again because it is a great, great work. This is a book that has such scope and so many threads weaving here and there and so many different people's stories because it's large and has the room to do it, but it has the burgundy thread of revenge feeding all the way through it. Do you know which book I'm talking about? A classic which is based on revenge. You probably may have guessed. It's The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. What a book. Like, what a book. Even though it's about 1,1300 pages long, apart from one little bit in the middle, it doesn't read like that. It really goes at breakneck pace. It's something Alexander Dumas had a gift for, the ability to move a story along. Now, the story starts with Edmond Dantes, our main character. He's getting married, I think he's in Marseille, so south of France. And on his way to the wedding with Mercedes, well, he's not with Mercedes, he's going to get married to her. He gets arrested, but he's not only is he innocent of all crime, he's not told what the charge is. Before he knows it, he's in the Chateau d'If, which is a Bastille-like building on an island out in the sea. Now the story will progress from there. He spends a long time there. The story in prison is actually, I found, thoroughly fascinating. I enjoyed so much. You see the mental, intellectual development of a young man, even though he's bound in by the walls, just by having a good tutor in an old prisoner. And then he will escape, and later the whole story, the Count of Monte Cristo, will come up, because the Count suddenly turns up on the French scene years later. And the word thrall is the correct word for the Count. He holds people in his thrall. He's like the mesmerizing eyes of the snake that hypnotizes its prey with its movement before sinking its fangs into them. The aura that he engenders, like a billowing smoke coming from great crevasses of a volcano behind him, lit by the lavaous glow. He's like that, and people are just captivated by him. Of course, he's exquisitely rich. He's in masterful control of himself. I think it's the Count that says, since punctilious exactitude is the hallmark of kings, you will forgive me for being 1 second late. You know, he's that precise. And obviously the society and people fawn over wealth as well and position. But he wants to seek out those whose lives once touched Edmond Dantes and the lives that those lives have touched. And you get to see the intrigues, the bitterness, the jealousies, the backstabbing, the innocence sometimes, and the assumed criminality at other times of a lot of people. And it all culminates. I can't go any further because I don't want to spoil the culmination of it unless you've seen the films. But they're no patch on the book, the films. None of them can do what the book does. It's just too big with too many threads. But there's also a great vista of other events going on, like the bandits over in Italy. You've got a public execution and the discussion that's going on from the windows watching it. And that's in Italy as well. There's so much detail, all very carefully weaved in and out. But there is the face of the Count slowly, almost imperceptibly. You don't know he's there at all. The story has covered him, and then his face just begins to emerge onto all of the players. It's just excellent. I'll give you a little snippet of the writing, not from that late in the book. Let's see what I've got here. I'll give you an idea of Dumas' writing in this and the capturing of the essence of sunshine, because this is a summer read. Even though it goes over years, for me, the overriding feeling is that of glowing gold heat. Day, for which Dantes had so eagerly and impatiently waited with open eyes, again dawned. With the first light, Dantes resumed his search. Again he climbed the rocky height he had ascended the previous evening, and strained his view to catch every peculiarity of the landscape. But it wore the same wild, barren aspect when seen by the rays of the morning sun which it had done when surveyed by the fading glimmer of eve. Descending into the grotto, he lifted the stone, filled his pockets with gems, put the box together as well and securely as he could, sprinkled fresh sand over the spot from which it had been taken, and then carefully trod down the earth to give it everywhere a uniform appearance. Then, quitting the grotto, he replaced the stone, heaping on it broken masses of rocks and rough fragments of crumbling granite, filling the interstices with earth, into which he deftly inserted rapidly growing plants, such as the wild myrtle and flowering thorn. Then, carefully watering these new plantations, he scrupulously effaced every trace of footsteps, leaving the approach to the cavern as savage-looking and untrodden as he had found it. This done, he impatiently awaited the return of his companions. To wait at Monte Cristo for the purpose of watching like a dragon over the almost incalculable riches that had thus fallen into his possession satisfied not the cravings of his heart, which yearned to return to dwell among mankind, and to assume the rank, power, and influence which are always according to wealth, that first and greatest of all the forces within the grasp of man. What would summer reading be without at least one murder mystery to read by the pool while the sun beats down and you wonder who's rustling behind the hedges? And so I've picked a very obvious author for a murder mystery, but one of her works which maybe is not read as frequently as others are. And it is Agatha Christie's Murder in Mesopotamia. I mean, how much more sunny can you get than being out in the sandy deserts of Mesopotamia doing an archaeological dig? Because that's the setting for this thrilling detective story. In this story, Murder in Mesopotamia, Amy Leatheran, a nurse from, I think it's from America, or maybe even Britain, is flown out to Mesopotamia to this archaeological base camp headed by one Dr. Leidner. Now, she's not gone out there to help him dig. She's a nurse. She's gone out there to help him with his wife, Louise, help care for her. Because, well, Louise seems a little bit unhinged, at least nervously disturbed. And maybe the weather's not helping, and the isolation, because of course having this base camp away from civilization surrounded by a desert is a classic Gothic plot to trap your characters when a murderer is on the loose. Now, Amy gets talking to Louise, and Louise starts confiding a bit more in her, and she starts learning about her past, that she was formerly married to some guy, Frederick, a German, who survived the war but oddly died in a mysterious car crash. Now, you learn a bit about other characters as well. There's a dotting of unusual aspects that you get to look at. But then there's an issue regarding death threat letters coming to Louise. And do you take them seriously? What's it all about? And then Louise is found dead in her bedroom in this archaeological base, surrounded by sand and ancient bricks. Who did it? And this is part of the Hercule Poirot series. So we get that lovely Belgian detective come on wandering in. That's the setting. I mean, I can't really say anything more. Agatha Christie is a murder mystery writer, but she just did it so well. She just had an effortless way of writing, which, I don't know, may not be the very best of writing, but her stories are great and she always manages to grip you. She never protracts the scene too long or adds too much to wear you out. It always keeps you on your toes, and she's very, very good at keeping suspense, at keeping you tense. You know, if you are reading this outside of a summer day, you know, you're going to get to parts where you'll start worrying about, you know, a clank at the gate, or you know, a cat may go through the bush and you think you're being watched by some murderer who's about to do you in with a sock full of wet sand, you know, that kind of thing. She's brilliant. So that was the one I thought I'd pick. It's got the heat and the atmosphere. It's also one that's not read as much as the others. That is Murder in Mesopotamia by Agatha Christie. Our ninth book is a book set in a village, the rural ideal kind of thing. Because when we think of summer, frequently what comes to mind is getting out of the hustle and bustle and just living a life among the droning bees and the crickets answering each other back and forth across the fields. And what sums that up better than a typical rural countryside scene? And this book has it, and it is Silas Marner by George Eliot. It's actually a really good story. It's almost somewhat moral fable-esque in places, because our main character is Silas Marner. Now, we learn his basic story at the beginning, that he's a young man who belongs to a Calvinist church. He's very, you know, devout and righteous and all that kind of stuff, and upright, until he gets accused, shockingly, by his best friend of stealing the congregation's funds. His best friend also wants to steal the girl that Silas loves as well. And because he can't defend himself, he leaves the towns and goes away to the Warwickshire countryside, where he settled in the village of Raveloe, which is a made-up village, by the way. Now, it's interesting because he's an outsider. Obviously, he's got an attitude which is quite severe. Being Calvinist is going to affect that in many respects. And so the villagers, they don't warm to him because he doesn't go down to the inn with them. He just stays in his own little hut. He's a weaver, by the way. And he just sits there weaving all the time. He's always at his loom, constantly. The way George Eliot describes when they're peeking in, some of the villagers, to spy on him, and the sounds that the loom makes, and the mechanical nature of him moving, you know, it almost brings a touch of the factory industry into the village via a man. And there's probably a subtle comment there on humans being turned into machines in the name of industry. But Silas, he sells his wares, he's pretty good, and so people buy them, and he makes money, and that's all he's interested in, accumulating gold. He loves to sit and ponder his gold and feel his gold and hold it. And in that sense, you get this almost Rumpelstiltskin kind of feel about everything around his area, his little hut, his little home, and the pond outside. And that's his life. Now, also in the village, we have your country village characters and gossips and all that. They don't particularly warm to Silas because he's a recluse, and he also is, unfortunately, smitten with catatonic shock. So he'll be found just stock still, unperturbed by any push or nudge or wave in front of his face. And obviously people in a village think that's a bit suspect. Now, in the village also you have Squire Cass and his family, so the person over the village. Now he has two sons, Dunstan Cass and Godfrey Cass. Dunstan is a reprobate and a rogue. Godfrey has a secret no one knows about. That secret becomes a powerful literary device that can easily be missed in this story. And they're going to play into this as well as some others. But then one day, while Silas is out, he's robbed, and he comes home and finds all his gold is gone. And he's completely broken. But in the middle of that despair, he finds something. A little girl who has been travelling to this village with her mother, who died. And the little girl just carried on. She's about 2 years old. And she ends up in Silas Marner's house. And her gold hair appeals to him. And so he takes it upon himself to look after her. It's like divine providence guided him. By the way, he loses quite a lot of his faith because of what happened in his church. And now he's going to raise this little girl, this strange character raising this little girl. And slowly she begins to grow, and you see how the village factor into it, and you start finding out other secrets. And then obviously you have the resolving of the whole story. Obviously I'm getting vague here because I don't want to give you any spoilers. But it's a fascinating story because you get this character that seems so unlikely to be the one to affectionately raise a child who's called Epi, is it? Yeah, Epi. And how does he successfully do that with a girl with no experience of raising children? And we start to see the humanity of people come out and how humanity is what restores our faith in things. So that's Silas Marner by George Eliot. I'll just read you a paragraph about Silas. His first movement after the shock had been to work in his loom, and he went on with this unremittingly, never asking himself why, now he was come to Raveloe, he worked far on into the night to finish the tale of Mrs. Osgood's table linen sooner than she expected, without contemplating beforehand the money she would put into his hand for the work. He seemed to weave like the spider from pure impulse, without reflection. Every man's work, pursued steadily, tends in this way to become an end in itself, and so to bridge over the loveless chasms of his life. Silas's hand satisfied itself with throwing the shuttle, and his eyes with seeing the effort. Then there were the calls of hunger, and Silas in his solitude had to provide his own breakfast, dinner, and supper, to fetch his own water from the well, and put his own kettle on the fire. And all these immediate promptings helped, along with the weaving, to reduce his life to the unquestioning activity of a spinning insect. He hated the thought of the past. There was nothing that called out his love and fellowship toward the strangers he had come amongst, and the future was all dark, for there was no unseen love that cared for him. Thought was arrested by utter bewilderment. Now its old narrow pathway was closed, and affection seemed to have died under the bruise that had fallen on its keenest nerves. She's a very good describer of people, is George Eliot. So there you go, number 9, Silas Marner by George Eliot. Wonder if anyone here has read it. We're on to our 10th classic for summer reading on this list. And this might come as a surprise to some of you, especially if you've read this book. But if you are a person that enjoys sagas, if you like box sets, then this is a book I can highly recommend you read because it's short and introduces you to a chronicle of 6 books which span quite a bit of time and will introduce you to some of the most brilliant characters you are ever likely to meet. It is The Warden by Anthony Trollope. What's unusual about this book is that not that much happens in it. Obviously something does happen, but not much. And you might think, well, why put that on this list? It is a great summer read, that's why. Because this is the kind of book you read if you're the person who likes to sit outside and just watch the bumblebees humming and shouldering their way lazily through the lavender. And just thinking of a time that once was. Slowing right down, you know, to the point where you can feel your own pulse coursing through your body. And just feeling the breeze. You know when you've completely stopped and become part of this world? This is a kind of book that would suit you if that's your demeanour. Because in this we have Barchester, the city of Barchester. It's a very small city, somewhat akin to like St David's in Wales. It's called a city because it has a cathedral, but its actual size is, you know, a village, a large village. Now, in Barchester, there is one Reverend Septimus Harding, and he is in charge of an almshouse for beadsmen, which was bequeathed to the cathedral way back in the Middle Ages by its owner when he died. And the owner said, use my land, the church can have it as long as they give a certain stipend to 12 old men in the village and look after them, have a warden there who looks after them. Now, Reverend Septimus Harding is the warden, and he looks after the 12 beadsmen. But because centuries have come by, and this is a time when the church is under greater and greater criticism, some say, shouldn't the church be giving these old men more of an allowance due to inflation. You know, now that time has gone on, surely the guy in the Middle Ages didn't want them to be stuck at such a small amount of money when things develop. And you can see the argument for it, although the men do get their food and their lodging and everything else paid for. And so one very righteous character decides that he's going to set matters straight. The problem is Septimus Harding is one of the most lovable people. He's kind, good-natured, honest-hearted, genuine, cares for the men that he looks after, and has never really thought that anything's wrong with what he's doing. But as soon as someone challenges this and starts making an argument that maybe he's not entitled to, you know, take what he's got, to be given the amount of money he is for being the warden, that some of that money should be given further to the men staying there, he starts wondering whether he's in the wrong. But he has a son-in-law, Dr. Theophilus Grantley, who is a strident supporter of the church. He will brook no challenge to church authority, especially in pecuniary matters. And so Dr. Grantley, he sort of domineers Septimus, his father-in-law, tells him what's what. And he says, we'll sort this out, and wants to take the matter to the courts to crush it once and for all, and to prove that the church has the right to carry on doing what they will with the stuff that was given to them. This is also the time of the press beginning to get hold of stories and whip up a fury amongst the public over an indignation over matters of, you know, church finances and the like, which people reading the paper won't know anything about. They'll just follow whatever the paper says. Excuse me. And that's the story in a nutshell. It's how Septimus Harding sort of has to navigate all these things going on around him, how the case is settled, and you just get introduced to the most ordinary, normal figures, not painted in caricature style, not painted as humours like in Dickens, but real characters. Theophilus Grantley, a real hard-nosed, you know, clergyman. And yet you see him in bed with his wife and her chewing his ear off and giving him what for. And, you know, it makes you smile. Trollope was brilliant at writing real people. And what he's so good at is Trollope is so sympathetic towards all of his characters. He doesn't judge them too harshly. Even if you don't like them, you don't get Trollope come down on them and say, point out these are terrible people, don't like them, here's the hero, support him. None of that. You also get the infighting of the 12 beadsmen when they learn they might be able to get a bit more money. How are they going to respond? Now, the reason this book is so good to read, it's light, easy. Yes, not much happens, but it's a beautiful painting of an idyllic life, you know, tucked away, closeted in some small, quaint town with the shady bowers around a cathedral close. But it opens up the rest of the world, because after this, you get the rest of the Barsetshire Chronicles. So what's that? The Small House at Allington. You've got Dr. Thorpe is in there. The Barchester Towers, Barchester Towers, and another one as well. And as you go through them, more and more happens, and different characters come in, and it becomes a bit like, not a soap opera, but you know how new characters move in, and you already know how other characters feel from the previous book, you know, their personalities, so you understand, hey, this person coming in now isn't going to be well received by X over there. If you like sagas, then you should pick up The Warden and start, and then shift on. I think it's Dr. Thorne after that one. But you'd have to double check, it's easy to find out. So if you like sagas, there is the one to go for. If you want something light as well. And it's very much summer in The Warden. You can see that cathedral close, you can see the house where the beadsmen stay, that's been left to them, Hiram's Hotel, is it called? It's not hotel, Hiram's Lodge. Hiram's Hospital is what it's called, because of course it's a hospice. So anyway, I will just read you the opening paragraph, which will just give you the tenor and simplicity of Trollope's writing. So, the Reverend Septimus Harding was, a few years since, a beneficed clergyman residing in the cathedral town of, let us call it Barchester. Were we to name Wells or Salisbury, Exeter, Hereford or Gloucester, it might be presumed that something personal was intended, and as this tale will refer mainly to the cathedral dignitaries of the town in question, we are anxious that no personality may be suspected. Let us presume that Barchester is a quiet town in the west of England, more remarkable for the beauty of its cathedral and the antiquity of its monuments than for any commercial prosperity. That the west end of Barchester is the cathedral close, and that the aristocracy of Barchester are the bishop, dean and canons with their respective wives and daughters. That's how it starts. You're automatically painted into this bucolic setting. Yes, it's a city technically, but it's small and has a cathedral, which back then is what quantifies making a city. If you've got a cathedral, you're a city by default, even if you've only got 5 houses around it. So that's the opening. Did you see the light flavour? Do you feel the summer taste of that? You could eat berries and ice cream or strawberries and clotted cream to that kind of writing. That was number 10. So there were 10 great classics for a summer read. If you're going on holiday or just want to laze away in the back garden for a couple of hours, pick one of them. Please let me know which book below that we've talked is one that catches your attention. It's interesting because the books you pick say something about the person you are, and it'd be curious to see which ones you choose to go for. Until the next time, my friends, I wish you joy in whatever you read.